Have you ever wondered about the secret deals that shaped the Middle East as we know it today? The year was 1916. The world was in the throes of a great war, and in the shadows of grand halls and candlelit chambers, secret negotiations were underway. The geopolitical landscape of World War I was a complex one. The Ottoman Empire was allied with the Central Powers, and their vast territories in the Middle East were a tantalizing prospect for the British and French. These two colonial powers were eager to carve out their spheres of influence in the region, and so the Sykes Picot Agreement was born. This agreement is named after its negotiators, Sir Mark Sykes of Britain and François-Georges Picot of France. Sykes, a politician turned diplomat with a keen interest in the Middle East, and Picot, a seasoned French diplomat, were entrusted with a task of enormous significance. They were to draw up the boundaries of their respective nations' spheres of influence. But this was not an agreement made in the spirit of international cooperation. It was a secret pact, made behind closed doors, with the future of an entire region hanging in the balance. The Arabs, Jews, and other parties involved were kept entirely in the dark, promised different outcomes by the British and French. The crux of the Sykes-Picot Agreement was the division of the Ottoman Empire's Arab provinces outside the Arabian Peninsula into areas of British and French control or influence. The northern part of the Levant was allocated to France, while southern areas, including Palestine, were designated for British control. This secret agreement was a critical moment in the history of the Middle East, setting the stage for a century of conflict and turmoil. But at the time, it was just another chess move in the great game of World War I, a secret pact made in the shadows, far from the eyes of those who would be most affected by it. Thus, the stage was set for a secret pact that would shape the destiny of the Middle East. What was so covert about the Sykes-Picot Agreement, you ask? Well, let's delve into the clandestine details of this historical pact. This agreement, named after British diplomat Sir Mark Sykes and his French counterpart François-Georges Picot, was indeed a high-stakes game of geopolitical chess played out during the tumultuous years of World War I. The Sykes-Picot Agreement was essentially a division of the spoils, splitting the Ottoman Empire's Arab provinces outside the Arabian Peninsula into areas of British and French control or influence. The northern part of the Levant, including modern-day Syria and Lebanon, was allocated to France, while the southern areas, encompassing Palestine, were designated for British control. But this was no ordinary negotiation. The agreement was shrouded in secrecy, kept hidden from the very people it would impact the most, the Arabs and the Jews. Even other interested parties were left in the dark, oblivious to the sweeping changes that were being planned for them. The British and French had promised different outcomes to these groups, but the reality was starkly different. The secret nature of the Sykes-Picot Agreement was one of its most defining characteristics. It was a backroom deal, a pact made away from the prying eyes of the world. The terms of this agreement were not open to negotiation or discussion with those who would live with its consequences. Instead, the fate of millions was decided by a small group of diplomats, thousands of miles away from the lands they were dividing. This secrecy was not just a matter of diplomatic discretion. It was a deliberate strategy to keep the true intentions of the British and French hidden, to maintain the illusion of promises made to the Arabs and Jews, while quietly planning a different future for them. So, what was the Sykes-Picot Agreement? It was a masterstroke of political maneuvering, a clandestine pact that would shape the Middle East for generations to come. But at its core, it was a betrayal of trust, a betrayal of promises, and most importantly, a betrayal of the people whose lives would be forever changed by its terms. In essence, the Sykes-Picot Agreement was a grand betrayal, a secret deal made behind closed doors. But why would Britain and France engage in such a secret pact? This question leads us into the labyrinth of motivations behind the Sykes-Picot Agreement. The answer lies in the strategic interests and colonial ambitions of these two superpowers, particularly Britain's interest in Palestine. Britain, in the throes of World War I, needed control over Palestine for strategic reasons. The Suez Canal, a vital artery linking Britain with its colonies in Asia and Africa, was in close proximity to Palestine. Ensuring the safety of this crucial waterway was a matter of national security for Britain. Palestine was, in essence, the guard at the gates, a sentinel watching over Britain's lifeline to its colonial outposts. But strategic interests were just one part of the equation. The other part lay in the colonial ambitions of Britain and France. As the Ottoman Empire crumbled, The Middle East, with its untapped resources and strategic location, was like a cake waiting to be sliced and shared. The Sykes-Picot Agreement was the knife that Britain and France wielded to carve out their portions. This secret agreement was essentially a blueprint for colonial expansion, a plan to ensure post-war dominance in the Middle East. For Britain, Palestine was more than a strategic asset. It was a jewel in the crown of their empire, a territory that could secure their foothold in the region. For France, the northern part of the Levant was a prize to be claimed, a territory that would augment their influence in the Middle East. The Sykes-Picot Agreement was more than a diplomatic negotiation. It was a manifestation of colonial greed, an expression of imperial ambition. It was about power, influence, and control. It was about reshaping the Middle East in their image. With little regard for the people who called it home, their ambitions were clear: to expand their colonial empires and ensure their post-war dominance in the Middle East. This was the hidden motive behind the Sykes-Picot Agreement, a motive that would have far-reaching consequences for Palestine and the entire Middle East. So, what were the consequences of this covert agreement? The Sykes-Picot Agreement not only carved up the Middle East between Britain and France, but it also sowed the seeds of discord that would sprout into a century of conflict. The arbitrary lines drawn on a map by diplomats, thousands of miles away, paid little heed to the ethnic, tribal, and religious realities on the ground. The agreement directly contradicted the assurances made to Arab leaders in the McMahon-Hussein correspondence. Here, Britain had promised Arab independence in exchange for their support against the Ottoman Empire. Instead, they found their lands divided, their dreams of sovereignty dashed, and their trust in the British shattered. The shockwaves of this betrayal didn't just reverberate through the deserts of Arabia, but echoed across the Levant into Palestine. The Sykes-Picot Agreement had assigned Palestine to international administration, but Britain had other plans. In the shadows of this secret agreement, the stage was being set for another one, the Balfour Declaration. While the ink was still drying on the Sykes-Picot Agreement, Britain was already promising the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. This contradictory commitment to both the Jews and Arabs was a tinderbox waiting for a spark. The legacy of the Sykes-Picot Agreement is a legacy of division. It's a legacy of artificial borders, disregarding the rich tapestry of ethnic, tribal, and religious communities that had coexisted for centuries. The result was a patchwork of nations, stitched together by colonial ambition and fraught with tension. Palestine became a focal point of these conflicts. The British, fully aware of the Sykes-Picot Agreement, still made promises to the Arabs through the Balfour Declaration, knowing they were contradictory. The Palestinians found themselves caught in a web of deceit, their lands promised to others, their sovereignty overlooked. The arbitrary borders drawn by Sykes and Picot disregarded ethnic, tribal, and religious realities, leading to long-term instability and conflict in the region. This, in essence, is the legacy of the Sykes-Picot Agreement, a legacy that continues to shape the destiny of Palestine and the wider Middle East. When the secret was out, how did the Arab world react? The year was 1917, and the Bolsheviks had just seized power in Russia. In their quest to expose the imperialist machinations of the Western powers, they unveiled the Sykes-Picot Agreement to the world. One can only imagine the shock waves that rippled through the Arab world. The leaders and people who had fought alongside Britain, buoyed by promises of independence, suddenly found themselves betrayed. The sense of outrage was palpable. In the cafes of Cairo, the markets of Damascus, and the courtyards of Jerusalem, angry voices rose in unison. They had been deceived, their trust shattered by the very powers that had promised them freedom. Their dreams of self-determination had been traded away in smoke-filled rooms in distant Europe, their lands carved up like a banquet for hungry colonial powers. The British and French had played their cards close to their chests, weaving a web of deceit that left the Arab world reeling. The promise of the Balfour Declaration made to the Jews added insult to injury, further complicating the British commitments and intensifying the sense of betrayal. The revelation of the Sykes-Picot Agreement was not just a diplomatic scandal. It was a deep and personal blow to the Arab people, a wound that cut to the very core of their aspirations and hopes. It ignited a flame of betrayal and resentment that still burns today. As we delve into the shadows of history, we uncover truths that challenge our understanding. The Sykes-Picot Agreement and Britain's role in shaping Palestine's fate is one such truth. It's a testament to the importance of questioning the narratives we've been fed, of digging beneath the surface to reveal the complex tapestry of events that shape our world. If you're intrigued by the unconventional, eager to challenge historical norms, and ready to explore the charted but with a different lens, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Until next time.